Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the organizers for letting me speak without a written paper. It is a work in progress, and I normally study micro work, but this I tried to do a larger work, so it's still, we don't have a paper. I'm more comfortable with the Middle East rather than Indo-centric West Asia. And likewise, I prefer to use the word Persian Gulf, because if you can have a South China Sea, Gulf of Mexico, and Arabian Sea, why not a Persian Gulf? It's also an historical term, and it is recognized by the United Nations. But I'm more posing certain questions than looking for answers. Who are the external powers? And from the morning, we discussed a lot about Israel. And I'm surprised to see that no one from Israel is represented in the conference. Was it just a coincidence? Or is it Israel is seen as an external player or even an outside player? I have no idea. The general consensus is that US is the external player, which has a significant influence in the region. There is no disagreement on that. Since the arrival of Putin and the economic wealth of the gas, Russia has returned to the region as a major player at the end of the Cold War. Then comes China. If you look at China from 1971, China always abstained to express its displeasure at the United Nations. But for the first time, they exercised veto on the Middle Eastern question when it comes to Syria. So China is a player now. So whatever political settlements you are looking for in the Syrian context, you need to have China and Russia on board. So far, they have prevented US from taking a military action against Syria, but they are not in a position to bring about a political settlement to that. This is a general agreement. But if you take a closer look, are there any other external players? If you look at the Arab Spring, Turkey seemed to be an external player, because the then Prime Minister Erdogan immediately looked at Turkish as a model, the AKP model. He forgot or oversimplified the historical Arab-Turkish differences. The second player you can see is Iran. Coincidence of Mubarak's departure, the Iranians said it is an Islamic revolution. They once again overlook two important things. One is the Arab-Persian tensions and the Shia-Sunni divide, whichever one looks at it. But if you take an even closer look, Qatar is playing a dominant role in a number of issues. Some for positive results, some not so pleasant ones. So if you look at these regions, they may look at Qatar as an external to that problem. And in that case, where does India stand? I may see India as an extended neighbor of any country in the world. I can see the world, India, as a center of universe. The question is, are you an external player or not? That is something not Indians will have to look at it. It is for the region to say it. I may like to play a very hegemonic role and pretend to be a nice guy in town. All the other guys are bad, I'm the new friend of yours. But the question is, are we an external player or are we a player in the extended neighborhood? That's a question we need to ask. What are the contributions of the external player? You know, it's like an individual relations. In any two relations, you have harmony and acrimony. Both come and go. If the relation is only harmonious, life is actually boring. You need tension in the soap opera, ups and downs in life. So if the harmony is a dominant feature, the relationship continue, endure, and strengthen. If acrimony is a dominant discourse, you go to the courts. The same thing applies to states, nations, and regions. So when we look at the external players and the Middle East, we simply cannot look at only one side of the picture. Sides because to everything. It is true, you can talk about any number of issues, imperialism, colonialism, divide, and too many ethnic groups in the same country or same ethnic group in different countries, Arab-Israel conflict, one can go endlessly. But the relationship is nowhere, it's a question of hate. A lot of good things happen to the region thanks to external powers. Let us have the courage to admit it. If you look at today, most of the countries are 40 years old. Last decolonization in 1971. independent state. So at 40 years, one would expect a degree of maturity. Not an infantile, whatever happens to me if I'm a bad guy because of my father. I think, countries should come to terms. If something is wrong with them, they also equally have a shot to play. The most important thing is a question of national identity. If we look at the post-Ottoman state, all the states in the region, including Israel for that matter, they do not have an inclusive national identity. That is not an external creation, guys. I got independent, it's my job to make India, whatever it is. The same thing, these guys are not able to develop an identity which is inclusive. Most of the problem today, whether you talk about sectarian, whether you talk about religious, you can locate it in the inability of the states to develop an inclusive identity. The second thing is, the region also benefited. If you look at a lot of reforms brought about by the Ottoman Empire, it is partly because of the westernization. Whether you talk about military, education, social, institution building, all of them because of external. But I'm just going to pick up only one issue. The region for almost 13 centuries were comfortable with caliph and ummah. But thanks to Western and European intervention, you have a territorial identity-based states. Today, we have 22 states Arabs. They are Arab, they are Islamic, but they are independent. And that's what it is. If you look at it, a Bahrain thinks, in addition to being an Arab and Islamic, I have a distinct Bahraini identity, which is territory-based. I think to a large extent, you owe it to the other external powers. For all practical purposes, US is the Persian Gulf power. Whether one likes it or not, geography doesn't decide whether you are part of the region or not. US is very much present. But you ask a question, how does the external power come to play a dominant role? I just pick up about 5 small cases, then we can argue. In India, we don't understand the security dilemmas of small states. Probably Israel is in a better position to understand the dilemmas of a small state like Kuwait than Russia, China, or India are. If you remember 1991, the Iraqi tanks passed through the deserts from the Iraq-Kuwait border to Kuwait-Saudi border in 2 hours' time. In 2 weeks' time, if I had to visit my friend in CR Park during the puja days, I may need more than 2 hours from JNU campus. That's the time we are talking about. So if you're a small country, you have a different security dilemmas. But in addition to that, in all the cases, your immediate neighbor is also your immediate threat. And therefore, you need some sort of an external power to guarantee your very existence. Let's look at the Organization of African Unity. It clearly says the colonial borders were designed because of imperial interest. But yet, it recognizes the independence of every state. Something the Arab League never did. It only talked about dispute settlement mechanism for borders. In case of a dispute, this is how you settle borders. Let's talk about a few examples. West Bank was an occupied territory until 1967 also. The occupying power was Jordan. See, we only talk about Israel as an occupying power. Iraq was claiming Kuwait to be the 19th province. Similarly, Morocco has claims over Western Sahara. Until 2006, Syria never recognized Lebanon. The Syrian representative in Beirut was called governor, not ambassador. It was only under international pressure and duress. In 2008, they established a relationship. Because all the claims are based on an historical incident, Majd al-Shams. Fine, but in today's context, if Lebanon exists as an independent country, you don't recognize it, you need an external power to guarantee that. And the Arab League could not provide that guarantee. So therefore, even to exist as a country, from a potential threat from your immediate neighbor, you need some sort of an external guarantee. I think that is where, if you don't address that question, you are not going to be in trouble. Okay, external power should go. Fine. Who is making that statement? Small countries? No. If you look very carefully, the removal of external powers from the Middle East comes from countries who are hegemons by themselves. Let's say international community is simply silent on the Arab-Israeli conflict. They say Israel and Palestinians sort out the problem. You know what will happen? The asymmetry is astronomical. So you need an external power to support the Palestinians to bring about certain thing. The same thing happens to a lot of countries. I am recognizing Persian Gulf as a term for the region. I am not legitimizing Persianization of the Gulf. If you look at in recent years, some of the Iranian officials were questioning the existence of Bahrain. They may not be important figures, but you raise that kind of question, can I exist as a country? I think that is where you need to address the problem. If this is not enough, we have a new challenge, the caliphate. You know, we have been saying a lot how the US played an important role. It's once again a Frankenstein monsters. We know that, you know, so many countries have created their own Frankenstein monsters. All you have to do is mirror, mirror on the wall. They will tell you. Even India is not an exception to that rule. We know that US played a role. We also say that Western countries in general played a role. There are some who actually say it's a creation of Israel. Fine, let's accept all for the sake of it. But you know, we need to accept one simple fact. It may not be politically correct. It may not be very popular. I think we need to come to terms as human beings. The founders of Islamic Caliphate justifies his action in the name of Islam. I think that we need to recognize. We need to recognize it may be minority and small, we are not getting into the number game. What we are saying is we need to recognize the entire phenomenon has the consequence of very narrow, parochial, xenophobic interpretation of the religion. I think unless you address that question, you are not getting into the root of the problem. You're only talking about the symptoms. US did this, Russia did this, India did this. These are not the reasons. You need to explain how a group of people could actually pervert and present that kind of interpretation. That's where you root the Islamic Caliphate problem. But this comes at a time when we all recognize the economic power of the United States in the decline. I'm not one of those in JNE campus to say that, no, down with US imperialism. I'm the last person on the campus to say that. But I'm willing to recognize that the decline in the economic power means decline in your political influence. You can pick up any number of cases in the Middle East, US is not able to provide a very convincing solution to that. People are talking about shale gas replacing oil, which basically means the region's importance in the US calculations is bound to decline. And nobody is happy with the United States. If you look at the Gaza crisis, the Palestinians were screaming, the Arabs were screaming, even Netanyahu was screaming even louder. So with the result, you know, US is simply saying, hey, is it worth it? Why do this anti-Americanism beyond a point in spite of everything I do? So therefore, the recent pressure within the United States for a disengagement is not worth it. Why do we spend so much of human capital for this region? Let them decide themselves. And that is why you need to look at the pivot to Asia. Asia seems to be more interesting than the thankless, troublesome Middle Eastern region. But the flip side is, all the people, groups and intelligentsia were criticizing the United States playing a role in the region and creating a lot of problems are not able to come up with an alternative strategy. Neither individually nor collectively. No one is saying, okay, US, you back off, let me solve the problem. Let's take in the caliphate. It is left to the United States and Obama to take the leadership. Why can't Russia, China or India, okay, you know, we will provide the leadership, let's have a strategy. And I think the problem is, everyone is criticizing Obama doesn't have it. The question is, do you have it? And I think as the Chinese proverb says, we are passing through interesting times. Thank you very much.